What's going on, guys? This is part 2 of our learning course. We're learning how to operate these cameras. Now, what I didn't say in the first video explaining ISO is that we're shooting on manual. We're not shooting on the P mode on your camera. We're not shooting in the A mode on your camera. We're not shooting in the S mode. If you look at the top of your camera, you should see a dial and there should be some letters. If you see an M, we're gonna dial it to the M and we're gonna get started. I didn't say that in the first video, but I'm saying that now and I'll say that on future episodes. We're only always shooting in manual. And what manual mode is that we're able to adjust any part of the camera. Because guys, the camera doesn't know what we're taking a picture of or what we're taking video of. So to have the camera light an image based on how we have our light set up, it doesn't know what it's looking at. So we have to put it on manual. Manual is like a manual stick shift in a car. You're literally adjusting the gears, and so we're adjusting the gears inside of our camera, which means we have to shoot on manual at all times. There will never be a day on this planet where I'm not shooting in manual. It's manual or nothing, because we gotta learn this camera, guys. So let's get started. Today's topic is shutter speed. What exactly is shutter speed? Well, shutter speed is how fast the picture takes. So let's say I was at a football game and the quarterback is running or the wide receiver is running. He's moving at a fast pace. So what the shutter speed does is the higher the shutter speed, the more it stops that motion blur, so it looks as if it's frozen, as opposed to if the shutter speed was lower, you would see blur in it. And you don't want a blurry picture unless you want a more smoother picture. It just depends on what you're taking a picture of. But when you're talking about a sporting event or something like that, you're gonna have your shutter speed up high. Now, literally, as far as high and as far as low goes, now if you remember ISO, the higher the ISO number, the more grain it had, which means it brightened up the picture. It's completely in reverse for shutter speed. The higher the fraction number is, the darker the picture is going to get, which means we would have to either adjust the ISO or the aperture, which we haven't done our aperture video yet. That's coming after this one. You would either have to adjust the ISO or the aperture to balance out the light, because when you crank that shutter up, it's taking the picture super fast. And when it does that, the light is not being exposed to the sensor as long as it would be if the shutter speed was lower. So it's taking it so fast that the light, it's not getting much light in, so you would have to adjust the other properties to balance out the light. So shutter speed also has stops of light. So let's break it down. From 1/2 to 1/4 is one full stop. From 1/4 to 1/8 is one full stop. From 1/8 to 1/15 is one full stop. From 1/15 to 1/30 is one full stop. From 1/30 to 1/60 is one full stop. From 1/60 to 1/125, not 120, it's actually 125, is one full stop of light. From 1/125 to 1/250 is one full stop. From 1/250 to 1/500th of a stop is one full stop. 1/500th is one full stop. From 1/500 to 1/1000 is one full stop. And then from 1000 to 2000 to 4000 to 8000, those are all one stops. So again, it's important to remember these stops of light, but let me give you a general rule of thumb. If you have the camera in your hand, meaning if you're taking a video, well, this is mainly about photography when it comes to shutter speed. Shutter speed is a little bit different when it comes to video. It's a little bit less, meticulous when it comes to video. I'm not really particular on my shutter speed when it comes to video, but on photography, it's a big deal. So keep this in mind. If you're taking a picture, you want the shutter speed to at least be 1/50. Why is that? Because of camera motion. Our hands are shaking, whether we feel it or not. Anything under 1/50, the picture's gonna come out blurry. It's not gonna come out clear. There's just no way. So as a general rule of thumb, you wanna shoot at 1/50 or 1/60 and above if you have the camera in your hand. Now, if the camera is on a tripod, you can go super low on shutter speed. You can go 1/2, 1/2 if it's on a tripod, because there's no movement of the camera. Now, I've never shot a video or took a picture at 1/2. When you're talking about shooting that low of a shutter speed, you're doing some type of photography on a tripod where you're trying to draw, with the light in your hand, you're trying to draw a word or a phrase in the image. Like literally, you can, with the flashlight, you can actually draw your name and it looks like lights if the shutter speed is low. But for the most part, other than that type of photography, you'll never shoot below 1/30 or below 1/40 or below 1/50. It's just not gonna happen. So we're just gonna focus on 1/50th and above. So there's a rule in videography that says whatever your frame rate is, your shutter speed should be double that. And we'll do a separate video on frame rate, but just as a general, heads up, 24 frames per second is what's gonna give you that movie look, that cinematic look. And we all like that cinematic look. Like this video you're looking at right now is 24 frames. It looks very cinematic. So if my frame rate is at 24 frames, then they're basically saying you should have your shutter speed at about 1/50 or 1/60 roughly, because that's twice the frame rate. Which to be completely honest, when it comes to video, if the light looks good, then that's what the shutter is going to be on. I'm not really particular on that rule, but it has its benefits. But shutter speed, so the lower the fraction number, the brighter the image is and the more blur you're going to have in your picture or video. The higher the shutter speed number, the more sharper your picture or the more choppy your footage would be. If you're talking about videography, if your shutter speed is super high, your video is gonna look choppy. And now I'm gonna give you a comparison. The reason why I keep swinging my hands is because I'm gonna do a comparison showing you how my hand looks when the shutter speed is cranked up high and how natural it looks. You see the blur, because naturally, whenever you do this and you see your hand, naturally you see blur, so that's fine. But if you wanted to eliminate the blurriness of doing this, you would crank that shutter speed up and it will look choppy. So, and if that's the look that you're going for with video, then by all means, then that's the look you're going for. If you're going for a more natural look, then you're gonna have that shutter speed a little bit lower. So again, the lower the shutter speed is, the brighter the image is, the higher the shutter speed, the darker the image is gonna be, which means you have to adjust either the ISO or the aperture to balance, or a combination of both, to balance out the light. Make sense? So we're gonna do a quick demonstration on how the shutter speed looks per stop of light. So we're gonna go from 1/2 to 1/4 to 1/8 to 1/15. We're gonna go all the way up just so you can see how things change. Let's get started. Okay guys, so we are currently shooting at ISO 200 and our shutter speed is at 1/4. So now what we're gonna do is, I just wanna show you guys, and it's gonna be pretty difficult because I have this little mini camera in my hand and I'm gonna need to take this other camera off of the tripod in order for you guys to really get a good demonstration of what's happening right now. So I'm gonna attempt to take this off of the tripod, 1 second. So as you guys can see guys, at 1/4, look at how the image looks if you were holding this in your hand. It looks super choppy, super weird, super low budget. So now we're gonna go from 1/4 or 1/4 to 1/8. And as you can see, 1/8 still looks pretty choppy and pretty weird. So we're gonna go from 1/8 to, you guessed it, 1/15. And now it still looks pretty weird and choppy. 1/15 to 1/30th, another full stop. Now it looks pretty natural. It looks pretty good right now. Well, let's crank it all the way up. We're gonna go from 1/30 to 1/60, another full stop of light. Now it looks really good. So this is the safe zone. If you're even with photography, you can go to 1/60. You will have to be still, but 1/60 is also pretty safe for handheld. We're gonna go from 1/60th to 1/125, which is another full stop. And the motion looks really good. We're gonna go from 125 to, you guessed it, 1/250th, another full stop. Still looks good. And don't worry about it being dark right now, because at the end we're gonna balance out the lights. So what comes after 1/250, guys? Remember, we double. You guessed it. So now we're going to 1/500. Motion looks good. You probably can't tell right now, but it is getting a little choppy. And as you can see, the lights in the back, they're kind of flickering. They're flickering because even though they're LED lights, they're fairly cheap lights. So when you cut the shutter speed up, it may cause a flicker in some cheaper lights. But we're gonna go from 1/500 to what comes after 500. You guessed it, we're doubling. So we're gonna go to 1/1000. We're gonna stop at 1000. So as you can see, And I'm gonna balance out the light so you can see the choppiness of it. But okay, so let me put this back on the tripod. Now, so let's balance out the light. So from 1/4 to 1/1000, that was a total of 8 stops of light, if I did my math correct. So if I went up in 8 stops, then that means I would need to go up or down, depends on how you look at it. I would need to go up on the ISO to balance out the light. So obviously we know that the higher the shutter speed, the darker the image gets. But we know with ISO, if you watch the first video, the higher the ISO number, the brighter the picture gets. So let's count 8 stops from where we're at right now. We're currently at ISO 200. So from 2 to 4, from 2 to 400 is a full stop, that's 1. Then from 4 to 8 is a full stop, that's 1, that's 2. Then from 8 to 1600, that's 3 stops. And then from 1600 to 3200, that's 4 stops. Then from 3200 to 6400, that's 5 stops. Then from 6400 to 12,800 is, did I say 5 already? I think I did. It's 6 stops. From 12,800 to, my math is about to get tricky, 25,600 is another stop, that's 7. And my camera, it goes to 32,000, but that would be a fraction of that. I would need to get to 1/51,000, which for some reason is grayed out. I'm not sure why. But this is a perfect segue into our next video, which is about f-stop, also known as aperture. So we went 8 stops above in shutter speed, but we were only able to go 7 stops in ISO. But guess what, guys? We have the f-stop, also known as the aperture. So we can go up a full stop in the aperture, and that'll give us the exact same image as we started with, or that we started with. So from f2.8 to f11 to f4 is a full stop. Now this image looks exactly how the image looked in the beginning, or roughly speaking. And this is a perfect segue into the next video, which is f-stop. See you guys soon.
You gave it to me, it's not the key, it's the word that be breaking them shackles. Bear fruit, a cup of pineapples.